Donald Trump is making history today as the first former president to go on trial for criminal charges. He's facing 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide hush money payments made to cover up an alleged affair with adult film star Stormy Daniels. Now, Trump has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Jury selection kicks off today, and the case is expected to last about 6 weeks. For more analysis on this, I want to bring in CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. All right, so jury selection. Everyone's sort of anticipating that this might be kind of tough to find a completely unbiased jury. So tell us how this selection is going to kind of unfold.
Anne-Marie, as I always call it, it is not jury selection, it is jury deselection. There is really no such thing in a case involving someone as famous, as infamous, let alone someone who's a past president of the United States running for office while this trial is going on. There is no such thing as finding fair and impartial people. What the lawyers and the judge may be able to find are the least partial people. And what happens here is you have over 500 people who have filled out juror questionnaires. And from that 500, initially, they will try to get rid of, as a group, all of the people who admit that they are biased, in this case, one way or the other. They'll get rid of the people who cannot sit for 6 to 8 weeks. They will then get into a pool where there will be detailed questioning to try to decipher those people, to try to decipher the answers of those people who will say, look, I've had opinions about him, I've read about the case, I've listened to the news, I've seen social media, I've talked to my family and friends, but I can still listen to the evidence and the law as told to me by the judge, and I will follow the rule of law and the evidence. That's the best you can do.
Rikki, the former president, as you just heard him, and this is not something new, he says this is unprecedented. This has never happened. This should have never been bought in the first place. Part of the reason why it's unprecedented is a former president of the United States has never been charged. He is, in this case, with some 34 felonies by the Manhattan District Attorney. Can you just take our viewers through the details of what Alvin Bragg is alleging that Mr. Trump did?
Alvin Bragg, as the prosecutor, has filed what they call falsification of business record charges, which would be misdemeanors, except that he also says that filing of false business records were done in order to conceal or commit a second crime, and that ups the misdemeanor to a felony. So you have 34 felonies. What they're really about are a series of checks, a series of ledger entries, and it all goes back to Michael Cohen, which we may remember was Donald Trump's lawyer, who was also Donald Trump's fixer. And Donald Trump was said to have had a tryst, if you will, a sexual relationship with a porn star, Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen, in the fall of 2016, right before the election, paid off Stormy Daniels $130,000 in what we call hush money. By the way, paying off someone to be silent about an affair, a relationship, a tryst, is not illegal in and of itself. How it becomes illegal, according to Alvin Bragg and the prosecution, is that it was really done in order to affect the results of the 2016 election. And in fact, the jury is going to be told that Donald Trump allegedly conspired or had an agreement with other people to interfere with the 2016 election. And certainly the words election interference are lightning hot and for the 2020 election. So bringing them up for the 2016 election really becomes something that will get these prospective jurors' attention. Later in 2017, according to the prosecution, there was a further agreement that Michael Cohen, as Donald Trump's lawyer, would submit invoices for legal services and that he would get checks or payments for such services. But they really weren't services at the time. They were really a payback plus an additional bonus so that he could pay his taxes on the $130,000. And that is what the 34 felonies are about. When Donald Trump says just now on the way into the courtroom that it's not in essence a serious case, that what you really have here is misdemeanors raised to a felony, adding in this election violation, which has never been done before. So one of the things that Donald Trump's lawyers are going to be looking at in the end is if he is convicted, can this hold up on appeal?
So all of that, Rikki sort of laid out for us kind of lets people know why often this case, out of all the criminal cases, was seen as a little bit the weakest.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rikki.
It's complicated, and Vlad and Anne-Marie. One of the things that we have to look at is there may be a great deal of people in the United States of America who wanted to see the direct connection of a case to the 2020 election, that they wanted to see the DC case go first, which has to do with election interference, or they wanted to see the Mar-a-Lago case go forward, which has to do with the taking of classified documents. However, that's just not the way the timing worked. So the timing worked that this is the case going forward. Now, there are a lot of other people in the United States of America who will say, look, the rule of law applies to everyone equally. And these are crimes. They were appropriately charged, and they will be appropriately tried. Saying all of that, Donald Trump's prosecutors are looking to seat a jury that will convict. Donald Trump's defense lawyers are looking for at least one juror who is going to hang that jury, because it is highly unlikely that in the borough of Manhattan, of the city of New York, that you would find 12 jurors who will acquit him.
Interesting. Rikki Klieman, always great talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rikki.
Nice to be with you again.